After selling my company for $28 million, I hosted a party. But just before the toast, I saw my wife drop something into my champagne. When no one was looking, I secretly swapped our glasses. Minutes later, she started to, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alan, and at 60 years old, I thought I knew my wife better than anyone. After 32 years of marriage, I believed Christina and I shared everything. That belief shattered on what should have been the happiest night of my life. The grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the laughter of 100 guests. I had just sold my manufacturing company for $28 million, and tonight was our celebration. Christina had insisted on throwing this party, saying I deserved to be honored for building something from nothing. She wore a stunning emerald dress that complemented her silver hair, and for a moment, watching her move gracefully through the crowd, I felt that familiar warmth of pride. This was my partner, my companion, the woman who had stood by me through lean years and prosperous ones. The evening was perfect. Old friends from the industry mingled with family members, sharing stories about the early days when I worked 16-hour shifts to keep the business afloat. My brother Marcus raised his glass during dinner, telling everyone how I had started with just $5,000 and a rented warehouse. Christina smiled beside me, her hand resting on my arm, playing the part of the devoted wife beautifully. But something felt off. Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of Christina checking her phone, her smile faltering when she thought no one was looking. When our eyes met, she would brighten immediately, but there was something hollow about it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of selling the company was making me see problems where none existed. The moment that changed everything came during the toast. I had stepped away from our table to greet some late arrivals when I decided to return for the champagne flutes Christina had prepared for our special moment. As I approached from behind a decorative pillar, I saw her standing at our table, her back to me. She glanced around nervously, then reached into her small beaded purse and pulled out what looked like a tiny vial. My blood turned to ice as I watched her uncap it and pour the contents into one of the champagne glasses. The liquid was clear, almost invisible as it mixed with the golden bubbles. She capped the vial quickly and dropped it back into her purse, then turned around with that same radiant smile she had worn all evening. I stood frozen behind that pillar, my mind struggling to process what I had just witnessed. My wife of 32 years had just put something in my drink. The woman who made me breakfast every morning, who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who had shared my bed for over 3 decades, had just tried to poison me. Christina looked around the room, her eyes searching. When she spotted me, she waved enthusiastically. "Alan, darling, come quick. Everyone's ready for the toast." I forced my legs to move, forced my face into what I hoped passed for excitement. My heart pounded so hard I was certain everyone could hear it, but the background noise of conversation and clinking glasses masked the sound of my world crumbling. "Perfect timing," Christina said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. Her lips felt cold against my skin. "I've prepared our special champagne." She gestured toward the 2 flutes on the table. One sat slightly closer to my usual spot, the other positioned where she typically stood. The crowd began gathering around us, faces bright with anticipation. Someone called for quiet. I knew that in moments all eyes would be on us, expecting me to deliver some heartfelt speech about dreams coming true and shared success. Instead, I was staring at what might be my death sentence, disguised as celebration. "Should we begin?" Christina asked, reaching for her glass. Her fingers trembled slightly, and I realized she was nervous too. Whatever she had planned, this was difficult for her as well. I made a split-second decision that would change both our lives forever. While Christina turned to acknowledge someone calling her name, I quickly switched the positions of the 2 glasses. The one she had tampered with now sat where she would reach for it. The clean glass moved to my position. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, raising what had been her glass, "thank you all for being here tonight." Christina lifted what she believed was the untainted champagne, her smile growing wider as she anticipated the success of whatever plan she had set in motion. The crowd fell silent, waiting for my words of gratitude and reflection. "Building this company has been the adventure of a lifetime," I continued, watching Christina's face carefully. "But none of it would have meant anything without the people who believed in me, who stood by me, who shared in both the struggles and the victories. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room before settling on Christina. To my beautiful wife, who has been my constant companion through it all, Christina, this toast is especially for you. She beamed, raising her glass higher. To us, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. To us, I echoed, and we both brought the glasses to our lips. I took a small sip, watching as Christina drank more generously, as if she wanted to appear enthusiastic for our guests. The champagne tasted normal to me, crisp and effervescent. I wondered what she had expected me to taste, what final sensation she had planned for my last moments of consciousness. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. People surged forward to congratulate us, to shake my hand and embrace Christina. For several minutes we were swept up in the celebration, accepting well wishes and posing for photographs. It was about 10 minutes later when I first noticed the change in Christina. She was talking to our neighbor Janet when her words became slightly slurred. She laughed it off, making a joke about the champagne being stronger than usual. But I saw the confusion flicker across her face, the way she gripped the edge of a nearby chair for support. 20 minutes after our toast, Christina excused herself to the restroom. When she returned, her face had taken on a grayish pallor, and she moved unsteadily. She found me talking with my former business partner and whispered that she wasn't feeling well. Maybe we should head home, she suggested, her voice weaker than before. I studied her face with what I hoped appeared to be concern rather than the cold fascination I actually felt. Are you sure you're okay? You look a bit pale. I'm fine, she insisted, but as she spoke, she swayed slightly. Just tired, I think. It's been such an emotional evening. As the minutes passed, Christina's condition worsened visibly. She became quiet, withdrawn, her usual social butterfly demeanor replaced by an obvious struggle to maintain composure. I watched it all with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction, knowing that whatever she had intended for me was now coursing through her own system. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 32 years of marriage, my wife had finally revealed her true nature. And in doing so, she had destroyed herself with her own weapon. But I wasn't finished with her yet. I had been planning for this moment longer than she realized. What I haven't told you yet is that I knew this moment was coming. For 3 months, I had been living with the knowledge that my wife was slowly killing me. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as coincidence. In February, I began experiencing dizzy spells and occasional nausea. Christina suggested I see Dr. Morrison, our family physician, expressing such genuine concern that I felt guilty for not taking better care of myself. She accompanied me to the appointment, holding my hand in the waiting room and asking detailed questions about my symptoms. Dr. Morrison ran a series of tests but found nothing conclusive. Probably stress from running the business, he suggested. Maybe it's time to think about retirement. Christina nodded sagely, squeezing my hand and suggesting that selling the company might be exactly what I needed for my health. The symptoms continued, becoming more frequent and severe. Some mornings I would wake up feeling drugged, my thinking foggy and my coordination off. Christina would bring me coffee and toast in bed, fussing over me with such tenderness that I felt ashamed for being sick. She started preparing all my meals, insisting that I needed better nutrition to combat whatever was affecting my health. Let me take care of you, she would say, brushing my hair back from my forehead. You've worked so hard for so many years. It's time someone took care of you for a change. The truth revealed itself on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I had come home early from work, feeling nauseous again, and found Christina on the phone in her study. The door was slightly ajar, and something in her tone made me pause in the hallway instead of announcing my arrival. No, not yet, she was saying, her voice lower than usual. It has to look natural. The doctor already suspects stress-related issues, so we just need to be patient. My blood chilled. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. I know it's taking longer than we planned, but Ellen is stronger than we anticipated. The dosage needs to remain small enough that no one suspects anything when it happens. When what happens? I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My legs trembled as I backed away from the door, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just heard. Don't worry about the money, Christina continued. Once the company sells and everything is settled, we'll have more than enough to disappear. Just be patient a little longer. I made it to the garage before my knees buckled. Sitting in my car, I tried to process the reality that my wife was poisoning me. The woman who had shared my bed for over 3 decades, who knew my fears and dreams better than anyone, was slowly killing me for money. The next few days were torture. I had to pretend everything was normal while Christina continued her caring routine. She brought me homemade soup when I felt sick, which I now realized was probably making me sicker. She suggested I see Dr. Morrison again, playing the worried wife perfectly. But I wasn't helpless. I had built a successful business by being thorough and strategic, and I applied those same skills to uncovering Christina's plan. I installed a small recording device in her study and began monitoring her phone calls and internet activity. What I discovered over the following weeks was far worse than I had imagined. Christina had been researching untraceable poisons for months. Her browser history revealed visits to forums about arsenic poisoning, discussions about symptoms that mimicked natural illness in older men, and searches for information about inheritance laws. She had been planning this for far longer than I had been sick. The recordings revealed the identity of her partner, David Brennan, our financial advisor. The same man who had helped me structure the sale of my company was conspiring with my wife to kill me. Their phone conversations were detailed and clinical, discussing dosages and timelines like they were planning a business merger rather than murder. Alan's been asking questions about the sale timeline. Christina said in one recorded conversation, "We need to accelerate things. He's getting suspicious about the health issues." "How much longer do you think?" David asked. "Dr. Morrison says stress from the sale could explain a heart attack or stroke. If we increase the dosage slightly, it should look natural. A successful businessman who worked himself to death." "And you're sure he hasn't changed the will?" "Positive. I'm the sole beneficiary of everything, including the life insurance. 28 million from the company's sale, plus the insurance and property. We'll be set for life." Listening to them discuss my death with such cold calculation broke something inside me. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. Christina had methodically planned to murder me, and she was enjoying the process. The tender care, the concerned wife act, the gentle attention to my declining health. It was all performance. I began documenting everything. I copied the recordings, printed her internet history, and started taking photographs of my symptoms. I also began secretly disposing of the food and drinks Christina prepared for me, replacing them when she wasn't looking. The symptoms began to subside, which only confirmed my worst fears. The most devastating discovery came when I searched Christina's personal belongings. Hidden in a shoebox in her closet, I found a small vial identical to the one I had seen her use at the party. The label read, "Nicotine sulfate," a substance that could cause heart failure in the right dosage and would be nearly impossible to detect in an autopsy unless someone was specifically looking for it. Beside the vial was a letter addressed to David, never sent but written in Christina's handwriting. "My darling, Alan is getting weaker every day. Soon we'll be free to be together without hiding, without pretending. The money will give us everything we've dreamed of. A new life in Costa Rica just like we planned. I can hardly wait to be your wife instead of his widow." Your wife instead of his widow? Those words echoed in my mind for days. Not only was Christina planning to kill me, but she had already emotionally moved on to her next marriage. I was just an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. I also found travel brochures for Costa Rica, research on countries with limited extradition treaties, and a notebook detailing how she planned to liquidate my assets after my death. She had thought of everything except the possibility that I might discover her plan. As the date of our celebration party approached, I realized that Christina was planning to accelerate her timeline. The stress of the company sale and the excitement of newfound wealth would provide the perfect cover for my sudden death. Who would question a 60-year-old businessman having a heart attack during such an emotional time? I spent weeks planning my response. I knew exactly what Christina would do at the party, and I was ready for her. Every detail had been considered, every possible outcome planned for. The only question was whether I would have the courage to follow through when the moment came. Standing in that ballroom, watching her pour poison into my champagne, I felt a strange sense of completion. After months of fear, uncertainty, and heartbreak, I finally had the evidence I needed. More importantly, I finally had the opportunity to give Christina exactly what she deserved. The woman who had planned my death with such meticulous care was about to experience her own creation firsthand. And unlike her, I felt no guilt about what was happening. Justice, I was learning, sometimes comes served in a champagne flute. Watching Christina deteriorate throughout the evening was like witnessing a slow-motion car accident. By 30 minutes after our toast, she could no longer hide her distress. Her face had taken on a waxy pallor, and beads of perspiration dotted her forehead, despite the comfortable temperature in the ballroom. "Alan," she whispered, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Something's wrong. I feel terrible." I turned to her with what I hoped was the appropriate expression of concern. "What kind of terrible? Like you might be getting sick?" She nodded weakly, one hand pressed against her stomach. "Nauseous, dizzy, and my heart feels like it's racing." Her voice was barely audible over the ambient noise of the party. Perfect, I thought, though my face showed only worry. Those were exactly the symptoms she had planned for me to experience. The nicotine sulfate was working precisely as she had researched it would. "Maybe we should sit down," I suggested, guiding her to a nearby chair. Several guests noticed our movement, and I saw concern beginning to register on their faces. Christina was well liked in our social circle, known for her vitality and charm. Seeing her suddenly unwell was alarming to people who had been laughing with her just an hour earlier. "Should I call someone?" asked Margaret Thorne, the wife of my former business partner. "You look absolutely pale, Christina." "I'm fine," Christina insisted, but her words came out slurred. She tried to stand and immediately swayed, forcing me to catch her elbow to steady her. "No, you're not fine," I said firmly, allowing genuine alarm to creep into my voice. "I'm calling 911. Christina's eyes widened with what I recognized as panic, though to observers it probably looked like fear about her condition. "No, please, I just need some air, maybe some water." But I was already pulling out my phone, playing the part of the concerned husband perfectly. "Something's seriously wrong, honey. We're not taking any chances." The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. The paramedics arrived quickly, their professional efficiency cutting through the party atmosphere like a blade. Guests stepped back, creating a circle of concerned observers as the EMTs began their assessment. "When did the symptoms start?" the lead paramedic asked me while his partner took Christina's vital signs. "About 45 minutes ago," I replied, truthfully. She started feeling nauseous and dizzy. She said her heart was racing. Christina tried to speak, but her words were becoming increasingly unclear. The paramedic frowned as he checked her pulse. "Heart rate is elevated. Blood pressure is dropping. Ma'am, have you taken any medications today? Eaten anything unusual?" I watched Christina struggle to form words, knowing she couldn't possibly explain what was happening without incriminating herself. Her eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw something that might have been suspicion flickering there. But she was too disoriented to think clearly, too focused on the frightening sensations in her body to analyze the situation logically. "We're going to transport her to Memorial Hospital," the paramedic announced. "It could be a cardiac event or some kind of poisoning." Poisoning. The word hung in the air, and I felt several guests exchange glances. I made sure my expression showed appropriate shock at the suggestion. "Poisoning?" I repeated, injecting just the right amount of disbelief into my voice. How could she have been poisoned? The ride to the hospital was surreal. Christina lay strapped to the stretcher, oxygen mask covering most of her face, while I held her hand and murmured reassuring words. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, comforting the woman who had spent months trying to kill me while she experienced the very death she had planned for me. "Try to stay calm," I told her softly. "Everything's going to be okay." Her eyes met mine through the clear plastic of the oxygen mask, and I saw confusion there along with growing fear. She squeezed my hand weakly, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. At the hospital, the emergency room team took over with practiced efficiency. I was relegated to the waiting room while they ran tests and tried to stabilize Christina's condition. The ER doctor, Dr. Sarah Martinez, emerged after about an hour to give me an update. "Mr. Peterson, your wife is stable for now, but we are very concerned about what we are seeing," she said, her expression grave. "Her symptoms are consistent with nicotine poisoning, specifically a large dose of a concentrated form like nicotine sulfate. I let my face show the shock any innocent husband would feel. Nicotine poisoning? But Christina doesn't smoke. She's never smoked. That's what makes this so puzzling. Dr. Martinez continued. Nicotine sulfate is sometimes used as an insecticide, but it's also been used historically as a poison. The amount in her system suggests intentional ingestion. Are you saying someone tried to poison my wife? I asked, allowing outrage to color my voice. I'm saying we need to call the police, she replied. This appears to be a case of attempted murder. The next few hours were a carefully choreographed performance on my part. I answered the detective's questions with exactly the right mix of confusion, concern, and cooperation. Yes, Christina and I had been celebrating at our party. No, I couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt her. Yes, we had been drinking champagne, but from the same bottle everyone else was drinking from. Did you notice anyone acting suspiciously around your wife's drink? Detective Rodriguez asked. I paused as if trying to remember. Well, there were so many people around. Everyone was toasting, celebrating. I can't think of any specific moment when someone could have done something like this. What about your wife's behavior? Did she seem nervous or worried about anything? Now that you mention it, I said slowly. She did seem a little anxious tonight. I assumed it was just excitement about the business sale, but maybe she was worried about something else. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Christina finally regained enough consciousness to speak coherently. Dr. Martinez allowed me into her room, where she lay connected to various monitors, her face still pale but her eyes clearer than they had been hours earlier. Alan? Her voice was hoarse from the intubation they had performed earlier. I'm here, I said, taking her hand gently. How are you feeling? Confused, she admitted. The doctors say someone poisoned me. With nicotine. I watched her face carefully as she spoke, looking for any sign that she was beginning to understand what had really happened. I know, it's terrifying. The police are investigating. But who would want to hurt me? She asked, and I heard genuine bewilderment in her voice. I don't have any enemies. I don't know, I replied softly. But we'll figure it out. The important thing is that you're alive. Christina closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. But I wasn't done yet. As she drifted towards sleep, I leaned closer to her ear and whispered something that made her eyes snap open in shock. By the way, Christina, I said quietly, I know about David. I know about everything. Her face went from pale to ashen in an instant. She tried to speak, but only managed a strangled whisper. What? Rest now, I said, patting her hand gently. We'll talk more when you're feeling better. I left her room knowing that her recovery would be far more complicated than the doctors anticipated. The poison in her system would heal, but the poison of her own guilt was just beginning to take effect. The woman who had planned to become a wealthy widow was about to learn what it felt like to be completely powerless. And unlike the death she had planned for me, what was coming for Christina would leave her very much alive to face the consequences of her choices. The real punishment was just beginning. The next morning I returned to the hospital with a briefcase that would change Christina's life forever. She was awake when I entered her room, though she looked exhausted and frightened. The confident, social butterfly who had hosted our party just 24 hours earlier was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood she was trapped. Alan, she said cautiously as I settled into the chair beside her bed. About what you said last night. About David? I interrupted gently. About how you've been slowly poisoning me for months? About your plan to kill me and run away to Costa Rica with my money? Christina's heart monitor betrayed her rising panic, the beeping accelerating as her pulse quickened. I don't know what you're talking about. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I think you do. Should we start with the phone recordings, or would you prefer to see your internet search history first? Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the young woman I had married 32 years earlier. But that moment of vulnerability quickly hardened into something uglier. You've been spying on me, she accused, though her voice lacked conviction. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. From my wife who was trying to murder me. I pulled out the first document, a printed transcript of one of her phone conversations with David. March 15th. You told David, and I quote, Alan's been asking questions about the sale timeline. We need to accelerate things. He's getting suspicious about the health issues. Christina stared at the paper, her breathing shallow. Alan, please. March 22nd, I continued, pulling out another transcript. You said, Dr. Morrison says stress from the sale could explain a heart attack or stroke. If we increase the dosage slightly, it should look natural. With each document I presented, Christina seemed to shrink further into herself. But I wasn't finished. The worst revelations were yet to come. But my personal favorite, I said, retrieving a photocopy from the folder, is this letter you wrote to David. The one you hid in your shoebox but never sent. I began reading in a calm, steady voice. My darling, Alan is getting weaker every day. Soon we'll be free to be together without hiding, without pretending. The money will give us everything we've dreamed of. A new life in Costa Rica, just like we planned. I can hardly wait to be your wife instead of his widow. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Christina's face had gone completely white, and I could see her struggling to find some explanation, some way to minimize what she had done. How long? I asked quietly. Alan, how long have you been sleeping with David? How long have you been planning to kill me? Tears began streaming down her face, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who had been caught. 2 years, she whispered finally. 2 years. I let the words settle. So when we celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary, you were already planning my death. She nodded almost imperceptibly, unable to meet my eyes. And David? How long has he been helping you? Since last summer. He suggested... He said there were ways to make it look natural. I felt a cold fury wash over me. David Brennan had been my financial advisor for over a decade. I had trusted him with my business plans, my retirement strategies, my family's financial security, and all the while he had been planning to murder me for my money. Tell me about the plan, I said, my voice deadly calm. I want to hear all of it. Christina was crying harder now, but she began to speak. The story that emerged was even more calculating than I had imagined. David had approached her about 18 months earlier, initially just flirting during routine meetings about our investments. Their affair had begun slowly, but David had quickly begun planting ideas about how much better Christina's life could be without the burden of an aging husband. He said you were holding me back, Christina sobbed. That with your money we could travel the world, live anywhere we wanted. He made it sound so romantic. Romantic, I repeated flatly. Murder is romantic now? It wasn't supposed to be murder, she insisted desperately. David said the nicotine would just make you go to sleep, that it would be peaceful. I stared at her in disbelief. Christina, nicotine sulfate causes seizures, cardiac arrest, and respiratory failure. There's nothing peaceful about it. She looked genuinely shocked, as if she had never considered the actual mechanics of how I would die. David said, David lied to you, just like you lied to me. I pulled out another set of documents, bank statements and financial records that David had probably hoped would never see daylight. Did you know that David has been skimming money from my accounts for months? Small amounts, but consistent. He's been stealing from me while planning my death. Christina's eyes widened. That's not possible. David wouldn't... David's been using you, I interrupted. You think he loves you? You think this was about romance? Christina, he's already stolen over $200,000 from our accounts. He was never planning to run away with you. He was planning to disappear with my money and leave you to deal with the consequences of my murder. I showed her the evidence I had gathered about David's financial activities. Transfers to offshore accounts, mysterious withdrawals, investment losses that didn't actually exist. David had been systematically looting my portfolio while convincing my wife to kill me. He told me he loved me, Christina whispered, her voice breaking completely. He told you what you wanted to hear so you would do his dirty work, I replied harshly. You were never his partner, Christina. You were his patsy. The full weight of her situation was finally beginning to dawn on her. Not only had her murder plot failed spectacularly, but she was discovering that the man she thought she loved had been manipulating her from the beginning. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I closed the briefcase and stood up. "Now you face the consequences of your choices." "Alan, please, I'm sorry. I was confused. I wasn't thinking clearly. David manipulated me." "Stop." My voice cut through her pleading. "You made a choice, Christina. Every day for months you made the choice to poison me. Every morning when you brought me coffee, every dinner you prepared, every time you looked at me with fake concern while I got sicker, those were choices." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Christina. The police will be here soon. I've given them copies of everything." Her eyes went wide with panic. "You called the police?" "Someone tried to murder me," I said simply. "Of course I called the police." As I reached for the door handle, Christina's voice stopped me. "What about David?" I smiled grimly. "What about him?" "Don't worry. The police will be paying him a visit too. I'm sure he'll be very surprised to learn that his attempted murder charge comes with additional counts of embezzlement and fraud." "Alan, wait." Christina's voice was desperate now. "What about us? What about our marriage?" I paused, looking back at the woman who had shared my life for 32 years, who had tried to end that life for money and another man's false promises. "There is no us, Christina. There hasn't been for 2 years, apparently. The only difference is that now I know it too." I left her there, crying and alone, to await the arrival of the police officers who would formally arrest her for attempted murder. The woman who had dreamed of becoming a wealthy widow was about to become something else entirely. A convicted felon with nothing left but the consequences of her own greed. But my story wasn't over yet. I still had one more visit to make. David Brennan's office occupied the corner suite of a prestigious downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. For 12 years I had sat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, discussing investments, retirement planning, and financial strategies. Never once had I suspected that the man managing my money was planning to steal it all and have me killed in the process. I arrived at his office unannounced on Wednesday morning, exactly 48 hours after Christina's arrest. David's secretary, a pleasant woman named Linda, looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Peterson, I wasn't expecting you today. I'm so sorry to hear about Mrs. Peterson's incident at your party. How is she doing?" "She's recovering," I replied neutrally. "Is David available? I have some urgent matters to discuss with him." "Of course. Let me check with him." Linda buzzed to David's office, and I heard his voice come through the intercom with what sounded like genuine concern. "Alan, send him right in. I've been worried sick about Christina." I walked into his office, taking in the expensive artwork on the walls, the Persian rug beneath my feet, and the collection of crystal awards commemorating his success as a financial advisor. All of it purchased, I now realized, with money stolen from clients like me. David stood up from behind his desk, his face arranged in an expression of deep sympathy. He was a handsome man in his early 50s, with silver-gray hair and the kind of confident demeanor that inspired trust. No wonder Christina had been taken in by his performance. "Alan, my God, what a terrible thing to happen," he said, coming around the desk to shake my hand. "How is Christina?" The news reports were so vague. "She's alive," I said, accepting his handshake while studying his face carefully. "The doctors say she was poisoned." David's expression shifted to shock, and I had to admit he was a skilled actor. "Poisoned? Who would want to hurt Christina?" "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you," I said, settling into the familiar chair across from his desk. "The police have some interesting theories." David returned to his seat, his brow furrowed with apparent concern. "Of course, anything I can do to help. Christina is such a wonderful woman. The idea that someone would deliberately harm her is just incomprehensible." "Isn't it?" I agreed pleasantly. "Especially someone who claimed to love her." Something flickered in David's eyes, just for a moment, before his expression returned to professional sympathy. "I'm not sure I follow." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. The police found something interesting when they searched Christina's belongings. Love letters. Very detailed, very romantic love letters. David's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. Alan, I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, David. I'm stating facts. I pulled out photocopies of the letters David had written to Christina. Should I read some excerpts? They're quite passionate. The silence stretched between us as David realized his situation was far worse than he had anticipated. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "How long have you known?" he asked, dropping the pretense entirely. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to document everything. The affair, the murder plot, the embezzlement, all of it." David's professional mask slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Embezzlement is a strong word, Alan. I prefer to think of it as advance compensation for services rendered. Services like convincing my wife to poison me." He shrugged with shocking casualness. "Christina approached me about the marriage problems. She said you were holding her back, that she felt trapped. I simply showed her a way out. By murder. By freeing herself from a man who no longer made her happy." David's voice took on an almost therapeutic tone, as if he were justifying a legitimate business decision. "Christina deserved better than growing old with someone she no longer loved?" I stared at him in amazement. "So you convinced her to kill me?" "I provided guidance," he corrected. "Christina made her own choices. While you stole my money. While I protected assets that would have been wasted on a man too old to enjoy them properly." David leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something that might have been pride. "Do you have any idea how easy it was? Christina trusted me completely, and you trusted Christina. A few forged signatures, some creative portfolio restructuring, and I had access to everything." $237,000, I said quietly. David raised an eyebrow. "You've been thorough. More thorough than you realize." I pulled out another set of documents. "Did you know that everything you just said was recorded?" For the first time, David looked genuinely alarmed. "What?" I tapped my jacket pocket, where a small recording device had been capturing our entire conversation. Amazing what technology can do these days. Crystal clear audio quality. David's face went ashen. "You son of a bitch." "Language, David. This is a professional office." I smiled coldly. "Though I suppose it won't be your office much longer." "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Can't I?" I pulled out the final folder from my briefcase. Offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfers that coincidentally matched the amounts missing from my portfolio. Travel bookings to Costa Rica under false names. Should I continue? David slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him. "What do you want?" "Justice," I replied simply. "You manipulated my wife into trying to murder me while you systematically stole my life savings. What I want is to watch you face the consequences." "Christina was willing," David protested weakly. "She wanted you dead as much as I did." "Really? Because according to the letters you wrote her, you told her the nicotine would be peaceful, like going to sleep naturally. You never told her it would cause seizures and cardiac arrest, did you?" David said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "You lied to her about everything," I continued. "The nature of the poison, your feelings for her, your plans for the future. You even lied about loving her. Christina was just a convenient tool for you, wasn't she?" "She was naive," David admitted bitterly. "Desperate to believe someone found her special. It was pathetically easy to manipulate her." "And when I was dead, what was your real plan?" David's laugh was hollow. "Take the money and disappear. Let Christina deal with the police investigation. If they suspected foul play, she'd be the grieving widow with access and opportunity. I'd be just a helpful financial advisor who managed the victim's portfolio. You were going to let her take the fall. She was never supposed to survive long enough for that to matter," David said with chilling honesty. "A grieving widow overwhelmed by guilt and investigation might tragically take her own life, leaving her devoted financial advisor to manage the estate as a final act of service." The casual way he discussed murdering both Christina and me was more horrifying than any rage or passion would have been. This wasn't a crime of emotion, it was a business plan. "You're a monster," I said quietly. I'm a realist, David corrected. You and Christina were just obstacles between me and a comfortable retirement. Nothing personal. I stood up, gathering my documents. Well, David, I hope your retirement plans included a federal prison, because that's where you'll be spending your golden years. As I reached the door, David called out one last time. Alan, wait, we can work something out. I can return the money, disappear quietly. Christina doesn't have to know about the real plan. I turned back to look at him. Christina already knows. I told her yesterday that you were using her. She knows you never loved her, that you were planning to let her take the blame for my murder, and that you probably would have killed her too eventually. How did she take it? David asked, and I detected what might have been genuine curiosity. Like a woman who finally understands that the man she destroyed her marriage for never cared about her at all. I smiled grimly. She's been crying for 2 days straight. As I left David's office, I could hear him on the phone, probably calling his lawyer or trying to access his offshore accounts before the authorities froze them. It didn't matter. The police were already on their way, armed with enough evidence to ensure that David Brennan would never manipulate another vulnerable woman or steal another client's life savings. The puppet master who had orchestrated my wife's betrayal and attempted murder was about to learn what it felt like to have his own strings cut. And unlike his victims, David would have decades in prison to contemplate the consequences of his choices. Justice, I was discovering, could be very satisfying indeed. 6 months after the night that changed everything, I sat in my new home office overlooking a tranquil lake that reflected the morning sun like scattered diamonds. The house was smaller than the mansion Christina and I had shared, but it was mine completely. Purchased with money that David Brennan hadn't managed to steal and untainted by memories of betrayal. The legal proceedings had concluded faster than I had expected. Christina pled guilty to attempted murder in exchange for a reduced sentence of 12 years in state prison. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attorney had advised her that fighting the charges would likely result in a much harsher penalty. David hadn't been so fortunate. His embezzlement charges, combined with conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud across multiple states, had earned him a federal sentence of 25 years to life. 53 years old, he would likely die in prison. A fitting end for a man who had planned the deaths of others for profit. I had testified at both trials, describing the months of illness Christina had inflicted on me and the systematic theft of my assets that David had orchestrated. The prosecutors had praised my thorough documentation of the crimes, though I think they were somewhat disturbed by how calmly I had planned my response. Most victims don't have such detailed evidence, the lead prosecutor had commented after David's sentencing. You were remarkably prepared. I spent 40 years building a successful business, I had replied. Preparation is a habit. What I hadn't told him was how satisfying it had been to watch Christina and David realize that their carefully planned crime had trapped them instead of me. The expression on Christina's face when she understood that David had never loved her, that she had destroyed her marriage and committed attempted murder for a man who viewed her as disposable, was something I would never forget. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Since Christina was incarcerated and facing financial ruin from legal fees, the proceedings were straightforward. I kept the house, the remaining investments, and my business proceeds. She kept nothing except the knowledge that her greed had cost her everything. I had initially planned to sell our family home, but I discovered something interesting when I began going through Christina's personal belongings. Hidden in various locations throughout the house, I found evidence of other affairs dating back nearly 15 years. David wasn't her first lover, just the first one ambitious enough to convince her to commit murder. Among her papers, I also found a diary that chronicled her growing resentment toward our marriage. Page after page detailed her feelings of entitlement to a more exciting life, her belief that I was holding her back from her true potential, and her conviction that she deserved better than a hard-working but unglamorous husband. Reading those entries was like discovering that I had been married to a stranger for decades. The woman who had brought me coffee every morning had been documenting her hatred of our life together, planning her escape long before David entered the picture. He had simply provided her with the means to achieve what she had been dreaming about for years. The most revealing entry was dated just 2 weeks before my 60th birthday party. Alan is so boring now. All he talks about is retirement and growing old together. David makes me feel young and beautiful again. He says we could have adventures, see the world, live the life I was meant to live. Sometimes I think it would be easier if Alan just weren't here anymore." She had been fantasizing about my death before David ever suggested murder as a practical solution. The realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The guilt I had occasionally felt about destroying her life evaporated completely. Christina hadn't been corrupted by David. She had simply found someone willing to help her act on desires she had harbored for years. My new life was surprisingly peaceful, without the stress of running a business or the underlying tension I now realized had been present in my marriage for years. I felt younger and more energetic than I had in decades. The symptoms Christina had been causing with her poison had completely disappeared, leaving me healthier than I had been in months. I had made some changes beyond just moving to a new house. Dr. Morrison, who had unknowingly been providing cover for Christina's murder plot with his stress-related diagnosis, had been replaced by a younger physician who actually listened to my concerns. My new doctor was amazed by my improved health and energy levels. "Whatever you're doing differently," Dr. Sarah Chen had told me during my last checkup, "keep it up. Your blood pressure is excellent, your heart rate is strong, and you seem to have reversed years of aging in just a few months." "Clean living," I had replied with a smile she probably interpreted differently than I meant it. I had also reconnected with old friends and family members that Christina had gradually alienated over the years. My brother Marcus visited regularly now, along with cousins and former colleagues who had been subtly discouraged from maintaining close relationships with us. I realized that Christina's isolation tactics had been part of her long-term planning. Fewer close relationships meant fewer people who might notice changes in my health or behavior. The loneliness I had expected to feel as a newly single man in his 60s never materialized. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief and freedom that grew stronger each day. Every morning when I woke up, I experienced a moment of pure gratitude that I was alive and free to make my own choices. I had even begun dating again, something I never thought I would have the courage to do. Margaret Thorne, the widow of my former business partner, had approached me at a mutual friend's birthday party 3 months after my divorce was finalized. "Alan, I hope this isn't inappropriate," she had said, "but I've always admired how you handled everything with Christina and that awful man. Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Margaret was everything Christina had pretended to be. Genuine, kind, and interested in building something real rather than manipulating situations for personal gain. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on honest communication and mutual respect. She knew my story completely and had shared her own experiences with her late husband's illness and death. "The wonderful thing about starting over at our age," she had told me recently, "is that we know ourselves well enough to recognize what we really want. What I wanted, I was discovering, was simplicity, honesty, and peace. 3 things that had been absent from my life for longer than I had realized. On quiet evenings, I sometimes thought about Christina in her prison cell, serving time for trying to kill a man who had provided her with a comfortable life for over 3 decades. I wondered if she ever reflected on the choices that had led her there, or if she still blamed external circumstances for her downfall. I also thought about David, aging in federal prison while the money he had stolen was recovered and returned to his victims. He had been so confident in his manipulation skills, so certain that he could orchestrate the perfect crime. Instead, he had created the perfect trap for himself. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to poison my life, Christina had actually freed me from a marriage that had been slowly killing me in ways I hadn't recognized. Her betrayal had been the catalyst for creating the life I truly wanted, one built on truth rather than hidden resentments and secret plans. As I finished my morning coffee and prepared to meet Margaret for lunch at our favorite lakeside restaurant, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this place of contentment. The woman who had tried to end my life had instead given me a new beginning. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the ugliest packages. Christina's poison had been intended to kill me, but instead it had killed the naive, trusting man I used to be and allowed someone stronger and wiser to take his place. I was 60 years old, finally free, and for the first time in decades, truly happy. The future stretched ahead of me like an uncharted territory full of possibilities, and I was eager to explore every one of them. Justice had been served, but more importantly, life had been reclaimed. And that was the sweetest victory of all.